He really didn't die on a cross. The apostles stole the body and invented the appearance stories. The first Christians, those early disciples, were subject to mass hysteria. When you look at the gospel stories, they point us in two directions. One, to an empty tomb. There's no body. The tomb is empty. And two, many people see and experience the risen Lord. All the Gospels agree that the Lord appears first to Mary of Magdala and some other women who came very early, Sunday morning, to visit the tomb. So Mary of Magdala becomes the first person to proclaim the news that Christ is risen. We actually, every day in the week of Easter, from Easter Sunday to the second Sunday of Easter, we read as the Gospel one of the appearance stories or one of the empty tomb stories. The solemnity of Easter continues right through those 8 special days. I'd like you to look now at a second presentation of the resurrection. This time it's our Eastern brothers and sisters. This is the Anastasis, the resurrection, Anastasia, resurrection. What a beautiful name. It comes from the Kora monastery, which was on the outskirts of Constantinople, right near the Blachernae Palace. And this beautiful church was restored and frescoes were placed there and so on in the early 14th century, at the same time as Giotto was painting in Europe, in Italy. And this is the most extraordinary church. It's now a museum, but if you ever go to Constantinople, Istanbul, you've got to go here. It's the second most important thing after Hagia Sophia. And what we see here is Jesus going down into the hell or the underworld and dragging Adam and Eve up and all the people who've died before Jesus to heaven. Most powerful scene of the resurrection. Okay, we'll move on. In Mark's original ending, remember Mark verses 16, verses 1 to 8, that's the original ending of Mark. When Mary of Magdala and the women come to the empty tomb, there's a divine messenger telling them that Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, has been raised. They are to tell Peter and the disciples that he'll meet them in Galilee. And that scene and Mark's Gospel ends with the women fleeing from the tomb in fear and amazement. Interesting. The longer ending, Mark 16 verses 9 to 20, added some years later, repeats the appearance to Mary of Magdala, who then tells the disciples, but they don't believe her. Jesus then appears to 2 disciples and finally to the 11 who are commissioned to become apostles. That's the longer ending in Mark. Luke chapter 24 has Mary of Magdala and the women at the tomb, and 2 men now ask, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" And the women recall the prophecy made by Jesus in Galilee about his fate. They tell the 11 and the others that they don't believe. And then we have the 2 disciples on the way to Emmaus, which in a sense is Luke's masterpiece about experiencing the risen Lord. And finally, we have Jesus appearing to the 11 during a meal. That's Luke. Matthew chapter 28 has Mary of Magdala and another Mary coming to the tomb early Sunday morning. An angel tells them that Jesus is risen and that they're to inform the brothers that Jesus is going to Galilee. En route, Jesus appears to them and confirms the message about Galilee. The second great appearance then is the final scene of the Gospel, where Jesus is on a mountaintop in Galilee and he commissions the disciples as apostles to go out and know that I'm with you always until the end of time. Another great powerful scene. Interestingly, within all this, Matthew has the scenes of the guards who were placed at the tomb by the chief priests. So when we look at all that, before going to John, what do we see? We see something like this. There are three particular sorts of things that are being said to us. The first thing is the discovery of the empty tomb by Mary of Magdala and some women, and the proclamation at the tomb by a young man or some angels or whatever, divine messengers, he is risen. And in two of the Gospels, go to Galilee, he'll meet you there. That's the first thing. The second thing, just mentioned, developed in Luke, is that Jesus appears to two of the disciples. And the third thing mentioned and developed is the appearance to the 11 and their commission to go out, etc. So they're the three things. There's also hints in other places that he appears to Simon Peter. But they're the three main things that are spoken of. Now we come to the second thing I want to do today, and that is look at John chapter 20. When we come to John, there's a whole new vision of the Lord's resurrection and what it means. We're shown different encounters with the risen Jesus, and each, in a real sense, is tailored by the Lord himself to the person who's seeking him. Each encounter comes as a surprise and evokes both awe and joy. As St. John constantly is telling us through his gospel, we must truly believe with our whole hearts if we're to know Jesus and experience him as risen. Father Michael Fallon writes this: without claiming to be able to define too closely these profound and necessarily mysterious experiences, we can be confident that John is speaking of a level of awareness open only to those who believe and love. I'll reveal myself to those who love me, said Jesus in John chapter 14, verse 21. Only the believer, only the lover, can be truly aware of the presence and action of Jesus, the risen Lord, in his or her life. The first of these four encounters in John chapter 20